The first vial that we come to hurts like fire when you put it in a wound. So here it is, all put together. Hello, welcome to Waypoint Survival. Today, we're going to talk about the contents of the Hobo First Aid Kit. Stay tuned. Most people today, because hobos have been unfortunately lumped in with tramps and bums, which they were not. Hobos, as I've told you before, were traveling working men who didn't have much work back home, and so they left and rode the rails to find employment. Their whole purpose of being on the road was to find a job. Because of this misconception, and to be honest, there were a lot of bad articles written in the newspapers. The railroads weren't always fond of the hobos, well, until harvest time came, and then they really needed them to bring in the crops so that they could have something to haul. So it was a bit of a tough situation. But because of this bad rap that they got, very often we think of the hobos as being just poor, illiterate, incapable of having many good supplies. But the truth of it is, there were a lot of supplies available to them. Remember that camping started in earnest directly after the Civil War. And so by the 1930s, there were 50 to 60 plus years of camping and surplus, as well as all sorts of things commercially that were available to anybody who could afford them. And organizations like the Boy Scouts had been around for quite a while. So perhaps someone who had been in the Scouts earlier or could pick up something pretty cheap from someone who took pity on them and gave it to them while they were on the road, they could easily have something like what we're going to show you here in just a minute in their bag, on their person, for those emergencies along the road. In a video I did not too long ago, I showed you the contents of the Hobo haversack. And in this musette bag, we have quite a few things that we would use for survival, things that a hobo would use in the era of the 1930s. One of the items that I mentioned was a first aid kit. And first aid kits were very common. Now, the very first first aid kit, which was released in 1888, is interestingly enough related to the railroad. One of the Johnson & Johnson founders, Robert Wood Johnson, struck up a conversation with the Denver and Rio Grande Railway's chief surgeon. And the doctor had explained to Johnson the particular dangers of railroad construction and the lack of medical supplies to treat the unique industrial injuries that happened far from hospitals. So after having that conversation, Johnson saw the advantage of having something that was small and easy to carry and build his young business, and from this first venture we get the very first commercial first aid kit. Then, by the 1920s, first aid kits were being created for unique purposes or to carry the names of specific companies and organizations such as the Boy Scouts of America. This is an original Boy Scout tin from the 1930s, and it was prepared by Bauer & Black, as you can see there at the bottom. And it was designed to be carried on your belt. The lid is a friction fit. Just simply oval shape. The first item that we find inside is a small paper bag. Contains a bit of gauze and some cotton padding. This would be to help soak up any weeping from a wound, any bleeding that might go on. Next, we have a small pair of scissors, steel, made in the USA. Very useful for cutting bandages and medical tape. The first vial that we come to, this small blue bottle and a blue cap with a blue label. These are tabloids, and it is an Emperim compound. This would be similar to what we would use as aspirin, and they were in powder, but these are in tabloid or tablet forms, we would call them today. And it says that it is for the relief of pain from simple headaches, neuralgia, and common colds. Our next package are Sentinel handy bandages, waterproof and soil-proof. These are a type of Band-Aid that were available back then. Again, very, very different than what we expect today, but pretty unique. It's a type of a mesh with a bit of a place here to soak up any fluids. We also have some of these early band-aids, again made by Bauer & Black, and they are known as handy tape. So again, not using the Band-Aid brand, but attempting, just as we do today, to keep free of lawsuits and marketing. We have the handy tape. Our next item would be some Vaporol aromatic ammonia. Now, those of you familiar with first aid from years gone by, and even today this is still used, but we have some small ampules, glass ampules of ammonia, which you would break under someone's nose and would help them to come to if they had passed out. Our next item is some Bernalay, and this is a simple burn cream. Here it is. There's still quite a lot in the tube, ready to go for those burns from fires or anything that you might experience out on the road. Had a lot of campfires, of course, not only in the Boy Scouts, but also in the hobo culture. Next, we come to the all-important mild tincture of iodine. And of course, this could be used for all sorts of wounds, and many people did use iodine for many things. It can also be used secondarily for water purification. Along with that, specifically for water purification, we have 12 tablets of Halzone, again made by Bauer & Black. It's very clearly marked right there as to what it is. So water purification tablets, certainly nothing new. Now, because this is a proper first aid kit, we must have a bottle of mercurochrome. And I remember having this used on me as a kid. And it is also made by Bauer & Black, and it has a little notation here. It says mercurochrome is a bacteria inhibiting agent which will not smart or burn, unlike the iodine, which of course hurts like fire when you put it in a wound. We also have a very small tube of Borofax. This is 1/6 of an ounce, and it is an ointment that is used, says it's soothing, and it's an excellent application for abrasions, for chafing, for chapping, and of course could use it for mucous membrane, so if you're around your nose if it got sore, but it's ideal for infants' tender skin. This would be something that you would definitely want to keep in your first aid kit, because walking long distances you might indeed deal with chafing and chapping, as well as from the wind from riding on trains. Next, we have our tape. It is made by Sentinel, and it's an adhesive plaster. Pushes apart just like modern tapes do, except of course this is all metal. And there's our tape that we would use for larger wounds along with the gauze. In the back, Bauer & Black made our handy pads, 3 by 3 inches of gauze, and these are items very much like what we would use today. A sealed pack, keep it somewhat sterile so that you could put that onto a larger wound. Because splinters have always been a problem in the outdoors, we have a nice pair of metal tweezers. Next, we have a small tube of Neosporin. This would of course be used very similar to what we do today to help prevent infection. One last little tidbit about Band-Aids. Of course, this is a handy tape, but Johnson & Johnson made the Band-Aids, of course, and in an attempt to boost sales, Johnson & Johnson offered free Band-Aids to Boy Scout troops. And if you want to know if you have a really old Band-Aid or not, by 1924 they became machine-made. They had little red strings to open the cover. By 1938 they began to be solid sterilized. So again, it might have been the 1930s, but they had a lot of things figured out. And last, even though this isn't technically a first aid item, it would definitely keep you from needing first aid. And it would be something that every hobo in the day would hope to acquire, I'm sure. Carried in a case like this, we have a pair of safety glasses. These would be extremely useful, something that you would want to wear when you're riding on a train, Sometimes they couldn't get in a boxcar, so they were more exposed to the wind, and this could really help protect you from flying cinders and debris, as well as when you were working. So this would definitely be something that a 1930s hobo would want to have. Again, not necessarily a first aid item, but something that would keep you from needing first aid in the beginning. So here it is. You can see it all laid out. It all fits in the tin, fits very nicely, doesn't rattle much, and it's a handy size to carry in a haversack or musette bag, and definitely would be typical of something that you might find in a hobo's pouch were he concerned about first aid along the road. This is James Bender for Waypoint Survival. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also make sure and check out the links in the description box below, just under the More button. While you're down there, you'll also find our waypointsurvival.com link. And this is where you can sign up to take survival and bushcraft classes at our beautiful training facility in Southern Ohio. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel. We'd really appreciate it. And when you do subscribe, make sure and press that bell button so that you can stay notified of all of our upcoming videos, and we'll talk to you next time.